Wells started to get drilled in the United States in the 1850s. The regulation around, hey, you should do something to clean that up, really didn't start until the 1960s. Yes, it's environmental, but it's health and safety in a very material way. And it's also makes that land not usable in that form, which is a huge issue.
This is a phenomenal story. So this is, I think, where we're going to start, because most people, when they hear orphan well, they really think of just environmental, but it goes beyond that. There is a business opportunity here, but even beyond that, I mean, we're talking about health safety. We're talking about dangers. We're talking about all things. So why don't we start there? And why don't you give us sort of what is actually happening here?
So it's interesting because I think most people have no idea what this is all about. I find if I'm talking to an Uber driver or just people that I meet in everyday life and I explain to them what we're doing, they're like, what? Yeah. And I think about it in sort of two buckets. There's the existing work that happens in the oil and gas space. There are going concern companies, big companies, name brands that everybody's heard of. They're in the oil and gas space that recognize, partly because they have a sense of responsibility. Sometimes it's because there's regulatory requirements, but you're digging basically a hole in the ground. You're taking hydrocarbons out, and that needs to be cleaned up when you're done. And so that's part of what's going on here. Most people have some inkling that that's probably, part of that business. But the thing is, it wasn't always part of that business. So, wells started to get drilled in the United States in the 1850s. The regulation around, hey, you should do something to clean that up, really didn't start until the 1960s.
So, wow, I'm going to hold on. Just go back here for a second. In the 1800s,
Right,
they started.
exactly.
Okay, keep going.
Right. And so you can imagine technology's changed a lot, but in any case, the reality is we have over 100 years there of basically wells being drilled. And we're talking about, these are thousands and thousands of feet into the ground, sometimes even more. And so the United States, in fact, the world, but the United States in particular is littered with millions of wells that are just sitting there leaking. And that, people hear that, they think, oh, well, it's a hole in the ground, that's whatever. But the reality is that these wells often are leaking toxic methane. And that is a huge, huge problem. To your point earlier, yes, it's environmental, but it's health and safety in a very material way. And it's also makes that land not usable in that form, which is a huge issue.
There is so much more education, but what is it that methane actually is? How toxic really is that? And it's not just methane that's coming out either, is it?
Correct. It isn't just methane, although, that's probably the one that people understand the most. I mean, sometimes there's hydrogen sulfide, sometimes there's benzene, there's other pollutants. I think, the word that we hear so much now is super pollutant, right? And what that really, one way of thinking about that is if people are concerned about carbon dioxide, the analogy would be carbon dioxide is like high blood pressure. Methane or other super pollutants is like a heart attack. And so sometimes you'll hear a story, maybe in Texas, maybe in Pennsylvania, of a home exploding. Very often that's because there's methane that's leaking and somebody, lights a match. So really big damage and risk. But there's also a lot of health issues as well. And so, it's not terribly dissimilar to having a natural gas leak in your home. These are toxic super pollutants, basically.
So is there a scent to it that you can detect?
If you have natural gas in a pipeline, they scent it, right? So you can't. So typically no. There can be though, and you'll see this if you go to the field and you're there in the wake of a leaking well. You you can feel lightheaded, you can feel nauseous. So there definitely are the symptoms that are evident. And I think you heard the story of a property that we remediated, an office building where people in the building were complaining of being ill, and they called the State Department of Environmental Protection and said, "What's going on? Everyone in this building is sick." That it just can't be a coincidence.
Right.
And they detected that there had been an orphan well on the property that hadn't been remediated. It was the building was built in the 1960s. They just paved right over a well without sealing it, and all of that methane had been leaking into that building and making those people ill.
And that's the thing is you can't just throw some concrete or some pavement or whatever. It's like a water leak almost. It gets into absolutely everything.
100%, exactly. That's why it's a very specialized industry, and, I think now that there is growing awareness of, the opportunity, but also the business opportunity, one of the questions I get a lot is, "Well, why don't we all go buy some rigs and remediate these wells? 'Cause there's a massive, business opportunity here," and the reality is it is very specialized. It's dangerous as well. Right. So having a highly skilled crew, which we have, is essential.
Absolutely. Let's flip over here to the vision of the company. When you look at Zefiro 5 or 10 years down the road from now, what do you want this company to be known for?
We are on our way to becoming the premier environmental services company in North America. There's such an opportunity to remediate end of life oil and gas properties. To your point, like it goes beyond just the sealing of the well. We're often, taking away contaminated soil. There's groundwater contamination. So there's a lot of adjacencies to restoring land to its original purpose and use. And so we are right now the only publicly traded niche pure play environmental services company focused on this area. And we're using that then as a place from which to grow into being the household name when everybody knows if you need to have something remediated, we're who you're going to be calling.
I want to talk about the name a little bit too, and I think this is a good place to start. Zafiro. I mean, tell us about the name because it is very relevant to what you're doing.
It's I think naming companies is an interesting endeavor for sure. And I started on the board way at the beginning, so was involved in the conversations around the name. But those conversations were really around. We were thinking about zero pollution, zero methane. It's hard to find names that aren't already in use, so trying to figure that out. Zefiro methane sounds like zero methane, but beyond that, if you look up the definition of Zefiro, it's an Italian word that means wind. And so the idea that we're cleaning that it's like a fresh wind that's coming into this space. And so I think we were trying to capture that image of that sort of fresh air that we're bringing into the world.
Catherine, let's talk about your investment case here.
Sure.
What first made you believe that this was a very compelling business opportunity? What happened? Because you've been in the oil and gas sector for a long time.
I have, and I think that there are some moments in time when there are multiple pointers towards something that says this is a real business opportunity. And so I think initially it was recognizing that there was a lot of motivation by oil and gas companies. Some of it was internally motivated, recognizing they wanted to be better citizens. Some of it was shareholder or boardroom motivated for oil and gas companies to say, we need to do better here. And so what we were seeing is that the standards were also being raised by those companies. They were wanting to not just pay lip service to the remediation of the land, but also make sure that when they were doing their end of life remediation work, that it would be permanent. And again, part of that was good citizenship. Part of it was there's governmental lawsuits around this. And so companies recognizing that they're better off paying for quality up front, getting it done right, and then they have the peace of mind of knowing that they can walk away from that and that piece of land is restored. And so that was a trend that was beginning in earlier days, but that was important because as we have been building out Zefiro and then the companies that we've acquired into Zefiro, that mindset around quality is key because that's what this industry really, really has needed. Separately from that, for the first time in the history of the United States, there were federal funds that were earmarked for the remediation of orphan wells. Um, and it initially was those dollars were allocated under the Biden administration. The impetus was primarily environmental. There were a number of environmental initiatives that were kicked off in that at that time. And I think we wondered at that point, is this a blip? Is this enduring? With particularly an administration change going from Democrat to Republican, is that going to persist? And we have been delighted to see that this is one of the very, very few areas that has very strong bipartisan support. And so the angle, the reason might be slightly different. It's not that it's not environmental, but more, I think, is also the recognition that there is a business development imperative in this. And specifically, and maybe the easiest way to think about it is if you want to buy a property to build a house on that land, if you acquire that property and then you get to the property and realize that there's an orphan well, and it's estimated that about 14 million Americans live within a mile. So odds are, it's not that unusual for this to happen. Well, you can't just you're not going to build your house over an orphan well that's going to explode or that's going to, kill you or whatever. And so we're seeing that in our business today, where big companies, household names are building data centers, they're building distribution centers, they're building LNG facilities, whatever they're doing, they can't build because they bought the property and now they find there's a host of orphan wells on that property. So we're being asked to come in and remediate those wells. So zooming back out from a federal level, there's a recognition that this country needs to have this problem cleaned up so that people can be healthy, people can grow their businesses, they can build their houses, they can do all those things, be safe.
So when you buy a piece of property, is the seller or the builder, or is that their responsibility to tell you there is a well there? Do they even know?
They may not know. See,
why would you buy a property if you knew it was there?
it's so interesting. So every state, there's 26 states that have had oil or gas production in the United States. And those states typically have a log to the extent that the data records were well kept about where the wells are. The problem is, again, starting in the 1850s, many of these weren't documented. And what we've seen, our teams, when they go out to find the orphan wells and remediate those that are on those records, they're always finding many, many more that were never recorded. So it's kind of like no one's fault now. It's just it is what it is, that these things are there and people don't know. So it's a discovery process. So it could very well be that the seller of a piece of land wouldn't know and therefore the buyer wouldn't know.
Methane abatement carbon credits are becoming a large part of the conversation. How significant could that opportunity become?
So it could become a very significant opportunity. And again, the reason that this is becoming so important in the frame of carbon credits is that methane is a super pollutant. It's estimated to be about 80 times more potent than CO2. And so people are recognizing if you want to address a problem, you may as well go to where it's most acute, right? So that's part of it. But the other thing that we're seeing right now too, and again, this goes a bit to the business development side of things, is there are many companies that are, for instance, maybe building a data center or other kinds of development they themselves want to be good stewards, but and maybe had very aggressive net zero goals. Now they're generating a lot of electricity to run their data centers, for instance. And that is kind of, they're blowing through all of their net zero goals. So how do you then, what do you do about that? Well, one thing you can do is you can be part of the solution and actually pay to get some orphan wells remediated, generate carbon credits on the back of that, and then net out. So that we're seeing some interesting demand for. The other thing that I think is relevant is, there are parts of the world, Europe is one, Japan is another, where, if you're an exporter of hydrocarbons, maybe LNG, to those parts of the world, you're gonna be hit with a carbon tax, on the carbon intensity of what you're exporting. And so one way to reduce the carbon intensity is offsetting. And so again, it's natural to think about, well, if the problem is being caused by hydrocarbons, then you can abate that through the remediation of orphan wells and abate the hydrocarbon issue. So we're seeing a growing interest in this area. And as we all know, with where we are on data centers, this is not going away anytime soon.
It is not going away anytime soon. And I would hope that too, people look at all this going, what if this was around a playground that my child or my grandchild was? What if this is under my house? What if this is by my school? What if all these things? There's so many what ifs right here. And I'm going to flip over to why this matters. If we zoom out for a moment, and we touched on it a little bit, how serious is an orphan well problem across North America right now? Let's put that into perspective.
So, it's an extremely serious problem. I think, as mentioned, 14 million Americans live within a mile of a leaking well. So your example of what if my grandchild's school is near an orphan well, there's a fairly large probability that it is. That's a huge issue. And so from a health perspective, from a value of my home perspective, there's a lot of reasons why this is getting so much attention, why corporations and governments are really focused on this. And again, $4.7 billion was allocated by the federal government. That covers about 2% of the estimated cost of abating all the orphan wells in the United States. So it's a drop in the bucket. It's a good start. But there's a lot of more work to do. That's part of why, from a business case perspective, I'm really excited about this, because there aren't that many opportunities in life to be able to have the opportunity to address, a real problem, make the world better, but also the total addressable market here, commercially, is massive. And the reality is my grandchildren's grandchildren will still be dealing with this problem. So this is something that, from a business model perspective, has, tremendous endurance and upside.
I'm going to leave you with this question right now. And yeah, I think this is a good point to stop here. Who takes on the risk of this? Who takes on, so we're going to go back to the home buyer. He buys a home, she buys a home, and then she finds out that there's 1, 2, 13 wells on the property. Now what? Because this is not just like, here's $100, and we're talking $350,000 sometimes. We're talking about whatever the complexity is, 100,000. Now they're on the hook for paying for that. Is that how that works?
Well, a little bit of it is, it depends. So the reason that there are orphan wells is because the companies, that drilled them are out of business.
Or passed away.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Hence being orphaned, right? So in that case, the liability really is on the states,
Okay.
which on the one hand is good, because it's not necessarily on the homeowner. The problem is the backlog is millions of wells.
And how do you prioritize?
Exactly. So now some states are working exactly on the prioritization. Our team has actually worked in certain states where they've asked us to go out and survey 900 wells just to identify the leak rates, so that they can then say, okay, the worst leakers go to the top of the list. Let's get rid of those first and actually remediate those. So the states are trying, and that's great. Now, in some instances, if the records of ownership of those wells exist, and if there is someone in the chain of title who still is a going concern as a company, in some states there have been, opportunities to get those companies to do the remediation. However, there are also instances where, again, very well-known companies find themselves in exactly that situation, and they say, you know what, it's not worth it for me to wait for the state. I don't have another company to go to, so they're just footing the bill and paying for that because if you're building, for example, a $5 billion LNG facility. And it's going to cost you $1 million to remediate a well or two. It's worth it, right? So it's a bit of what's going on right now. It's very early days in terms of figuring out how to get this done most efficiently. But, credit to the states that have been actually actively engaged with the federal government on this to try to actually be as sort of commercially minded and also equally focused on how do we get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of health and safety, in terms of environmental remediation, in terms of creating a situation that is more conducive to actually being able to make use of these properties and so on. So people are trying. It's heartening, I would say, to see people coming together with businesses, coming together with government, trying to solve a problem. But it's one that really, really needs to be solved.
Well, Zefiro, you are thank you. First of all, thank you for developing this, for being a part of this, for being part of a solution. It is one step, and it's a massive step. I mean, what was the thing that we said when we put somebody on the moon? This is one step for many for mankind, or whatever it
Right.
was.
Sure.
Thank you for that. And thank you for sitting with me. And I am so excited just to get out into one of the sites or some of the sites and really see what that looks like and bring the audience into that.
Well, I'm super excited that you're doing that. I really appreciate you being here. And the real heroes in this business you will see today, the people who are actually out there plugging the wells. It's a real joy to see the work that they're doing. It's really important work. So I'm glad you're going to be there.
So much more to see. Stay tuned.